Is it possible for a single moment, one pause, one breath, to change the direction of an entire life? That morning, Evelyn wasn't looking for anything. She wasn't chasing a cause or trying to rescue anyone. She was just walking, wrapped in her thickest scarf gloves, pulled tight, head down, letting her boots crunch over frost-bitten leaves. It was the kind of bitter cold that seeps into your thoughts, silencing them. And that silence was exactly what she needed. But then there it was, a shape small still and covered in snow, resting on a quiet park bench barely visible except for the faintest movement, like breath, or maybe imagination. From a distance, it could have been a forgotten mitten or a clump of ice. But Evelyn stopped. Something tugged at her, not loudly, not urgently, just enough. She stepped closer. What she found wasn't a mitten, and it certainly wasn't ice. It was a baby bobcat. No collar, no noise, no warmth, except for the flicker of life barely holding on. What happened next wasn't just a rescue. It was a beginning neither of them could have imagined. And if you've ever wondered how a wild animal lost and nearly frozen could quietly lead someone back to themselves, this is that story. Stay with me, because what you're about to hear might just restore something you thought you'd lost. It had been 4 winters since Evelyn lost Daniel, and yet she still made 2 cups of tea every morning. One steeped strong, like he used to take it, the other lighter with a dash of lemon. She never drank his. In a town like Oak Ridge, quiet pine ringed, and a little out of the way, memories had a way of lingering. They clung to door frames soaked into the carpet, waited in the stillness between clock ticks. After the funeral, Evelyn promised herself she wouldn't shrink into grief. She would keep moving. She'd take daily walks, plant more herbs, maybe even start sketching again. But time, as it tends to do, slipped sideways. The herbs withered. The sketchbook stayed in the drawer. The walks, those became the only thing that stuck. Evelyn didn't walk for exercise, though her doctor recommended it. She walked to breathe, to quiet the thrum of old ache. She walked to remind herself that the world still moved forward, even if she hadn't figured out how to. That morning, the sky hung low over the pines, heavy with cloud, but not snow. It was cold, bone-deep cold, the kind that turns breath into mist and fingertips stiff before the first mile. Still, Evelyn bundled up. Flannel-lined coat wool hat boots that squeaked in the frost. She took the winding path through the park near downtown, the one with old benches and a half-frozen pond and squirrels that darted like secrets. The same route, the same silence. Until it wasn't. But we'll get to that. Evelyn's world had become small, but not by accident. After Daniel passed, people tried. They meant well. Neighbors brought casseroles, friends sent holiday cards, and Martha next door offered her cat for weekend cuddles. Her son Michael called every Sunday at 3, always asking if she'd thought about moving closer to him and the grandkids. She always said, maybe, but truthfully, Evelyn felt more like a visitor in her own life. Her routines kept her upright, but not awake. There was always something unfinished about the days, like she was waiting for something without knowing what. She remembered once reading about wild animals, how they carry trauma in their bodies long after the danger has passed. How some bobcats, when orphaned, won't approach food for days, how they freeze even when rescued. She didn't know why that memory returned now, but it did. Grief, like frost, doesn't always shout its arrival. Sometimes it just creeps in through the cracks and makes itself at home. And so Evelyn walked. Every day, past the dog park, the shuttered bookstore, the wooden statue of a mountain lion carved from storm-felled oak. She'd stop, sometimes, rest her hand on the wood's shoulder, whisper a soft morning, and move on. There was one walk, though, that had ended differently. Last autumn. A man named Tom, friendly flannel-wearing with a slow smile, had offered to join her. She'd met him through a friend of Daniel's at a local storytelling night. They talked about gardening volunteer work and the best place for apple pie in town. He was kind, but when he invited her to a Sunday market, Evelyn panicked. She told him she wasn't ready. She wasn't sure why the words came out like that. She never called him back. Later that week, she found the flyer he'd given her tucked inside a cookbook. She kept it, but the market came and went. There's a quiet kind of shame in not knowing how to move forward. Evelyn had her reasons. Some days she wore them like armor. Other days they were the very weight that kept her from standing. But the truth, she was scared. Not of people, not of change, but of caring again, of attaching, of loss. She had loved deeply once. That was more than many people got. Still, there was a corner of her house next to the coat rack where a small ceramic bowl sat empty. It had belonged to a cat named Percy years ago. She never got rid of it. And when the vet sent a sympathy card after his passing, Evelyn folded it and tucked it under the bowl. She hadn't looked at it in a long time. People don't often talk about the quiet loves we lose, the ones with fur and paws and UN and spoken understanding. But they shape us too. And that morning, with her breath puffing white and her fingers stiff, Evelyn thought of that bowl. It didn't mean anything in the moment, just a thought like a bubble rising through silence. She paused at the footbridge by the creek, watched the icy water snake below. A cardinal landed on the railing, looked at her, then fluttered off. She smiled, just barely. A stranger watching from a distance might have thought there's a woman who has everything in order. But small gestures often hide larger stories. Evelyn's story was tucked into routines masked by politeness, hidden in the space between a sigh and a sentence. Sometimes we don't need to start over. We just need to feel again. As she turned the corner into the northern end of the park, where the old wooden benches curved like bookends along the path, she noticed something odd. There was a patch of snow that looked out of place. It wasn't the shape. It was the stillness, the kind of stillness that suggests fragility or fear or something waiting. Evelyn stopped walking. And that, dear listener, is where the story truly begins. Before we meet Maple, before the fire of small paws and stubborn life, before Evelyn's quiet house fills with new breath and tangled blankets and broken rules, we start here. With a woman who almost kept walking. Sometimes healing doesn't begin with a big decision. It begins when you stop walking long enough to notice something small. Grief changes how we perceive movement, silence, and even cold. Like orphaned wildcats, we may freeze in place not because we want to, but because we don't yet trust the warmth. Loneliness often mimics safety. It creates distance that feels like protection, but all it takes is one unexpected encounter to shake that illusion loose. Evelyn's hand brushes frost from the park bench, close-up of her expression shifting from confusion to quiet alarm. No dramatic music, just heartbeat and wind. Have you ever stopped just because something didn't feel right and found something you never expected? Let us know in the comments. What Evelyn finds on that bench isn't a lost pet. It isn't a snowdrift, and it isn't ready to be touched, but it will touch everything. In the next chapter, we meet the tiny wild heartbeat that refuses to give up, and the woman who shelters it. The first thing Evelyn noticed was how impossibly light the body was. She had expected weight, a heft that would push back against her palms, but the small creature folded into her hands like a bundle of dry leaves. Cold, yes, and stiff like something already gone. But there was a flicker. Not movement exactly, more like memory, like warmth, trapped deep in the center, refusing to leave. She had no plan, no reason to believe she was doing the right thing. But her hands moved before her thoughts could catch up. She pressed the bundle against her chest, wrapping it in her scarf, shielding it from the wind. Her heart thudded against her ribs louder than it had in weeks, maybe months. She walked faster than she had in years. No one saw her. The streets were empty, too early for coffee shops, too late for dog walkers. The only witnesses were snow-dusted trees and one startled crow. That was fine. She wasn't ready to explain what was in her arms or why she was trembling. Her cottage was just past the corner bakery, a small greenhouse with a crooked fence and a porch that creaked in all seasons. She kicked the door open with her boot, closed it with her hip, and carried the bundle straight to the bathroom. She didn't unwrap it right away. Instead, she turned on the space heater, lined the counter with a folded towel, and held the kitten close to her chest for one more minute. Then another. She hadn't held anything so gently since Daniel had fallen ill. Not even Scout's predecessor, Percy the tabby, who passed away quietly by the fireplace 5 winters ago. Finally, she placed the bundle on the towel and unwrapped the scarf. The fur was coarse and matted, striped with orange and rust. The paws too big for a house cat. The tail short and tufted. Evelyn blinked. A bobcat. A baby one. She had seen photos before. Read about them in conservation pamphlets she used to help organize for the town's wildlife center. But never this close. Never breathing under her fingertips. Her first instinct was doubt. She wasn't trained. She wasn't licensed. What if she made it worse? Still, she couldn't bring herself to call animal control. Not yet. Not until she knew. She remembered something she'd read once about reviving cold kittens. Not bobcats specifically, but still. The basics were the same. Don't use hot water. Don't feed too soon. Warmth, hydration, glucose, gently, slowly. Evelyn filled a bowl with warm water and soaked a washcloth, then began to wipe the frost from the kitten's ears, paws, and cheeks. The body didn't resist, but the eyes twitched. Once. That was enough. She didn't name it right away. Naming things made them real, made them yours. And this wild baby wasn't hers, not yet. But she couldn't stop calling it you, soft, tender, as if the kitten were listening, as if it mattered. "You're not supposed to be here, are you?" she whispered. "But neither am I, some days." She searched her cabinets for honey, found a nearly empty jar and a mug from Daniel's old hiking trip. She stirred a little sugar into warm water, dipped her finger and held it near the tiny mouth. At first, nothing. Then the smallest flick of a tongue. Evelyn laughed, a sound so sudden she startled herself. "You stubborn thing!" She settled the kitten in a shoebox lined with old scarves and set the heater nearby. She spent the rest of the day reading from her phone, looking up wildlife rescue guides and watching videos of bobcat babies rescued in Colorado and Montana. Most were eventually transferred to sanctuaries. Some couldn't be rewilded. Some were released. She learned terms like soft release rehab window and human scent aversion. She also learned that what she was doing, keeping a wild animal in her home, wasn't recommended. But it was also the only thing she could do in the moment. And for the moment, that had to be enough. By sunset, the kitten was still alive, still breathing, eyes closed, but no longer frozen. Evelyn sat beside the box on the tiled floor, her back against the bathtub. She hadn't done that since she was 30 the night before giving birth to her son, when the contractions had begun. And she didn't want to wake Daniel. Now, with this wild, broken thing beside her, she felt the same mix of fear and wonder. Not quite maternal, but something close, something sacred. She texted Martha a single sentence, "Found something I can't explain. I'm okay. Don't call yet." Then she powered off her phone. The next morning, the kitten lifted its head. It wasn't graceful. It wasn't even steady, but the effort, it was there. Evelyn smiled. She hadn't expected that. By mid-morning, the kitten tried to walk, legs wobbling, tail dragging slightly. It collapsed after 3 steps, but it tried again. She called the local vet, Dr. Harris. Explained only that she had found a sick, possibly wild kitten in the park. Could he take a quick look? He hesitated but agreed. Evelyn wrapped the kitten in a fleece-lined sweater and placed it inside a reusable canvas tote bag. She caught her reflection in the hallway mirror before leaving flushed cheeks, wind-tousled hair, tote against her chest like a shield. At the clinic, Dr. Harris examined the kitten with practiced calm. "Bobcat," he said gently, after checking the eyes and teeth. 9, maybe 10 weeks. Thin, cold, but lucky. No frostbite, no visible injury. He paused. "She's going to need time. And space." Evelyn nodded. He didn't ask if she was keeping it. Just told her to keep it warm. Feed it slowly, and to call a wildlife specialist if things change. Before leaving, he asked almost offhand, "What's her name?" Evelyn opened her mouth, closed it, shrugged. "I haven't decided yet." Back home, the kitten, still unnamed, slept curled in a basket lined with towels. She had taken over the corner of the living room that Evelyn once used for jigsaw puzzles. That night, Evelyn sat nearby, reading a book she couldn't focus on. Every time she turned a page, she glanced toward the basket. She tried a few names in her head. Luna, Tawny, Mist. None felt right. Then she looked at the small rust-colored tufts on the kitten's ears, the softness under the chin, the faint maple leaf shape that marked the side of her face. "Maple," she whispered. The kitten didn't move, but the word settled in Evelyn's chest with unexpected warmth. Maple. It felt gentle, rooted, wild, but not unreachable. She didn't speak it again that night, just kept it tucked quietly between breaths. Bobcat rescue organizations across the U.S. often document similar situations where people find abandoned or freezing wild kittens and must choose between immediate care and long-term legal process. The transition from emergency warmth to sanctuary placement is rarely clear-cut. For many, the first few days are survival for the animal and often for the rescuer's sense of hope. Compassion doesn't always follow a rule book. Sometimes the right choice looks like hesitation. And sometimes saving a life means accepting uncertainty. We often imagine animal rescue as a heroic act, but more often it's intimate, messy, quiet. It's a trembling decision made in a hallway mirror. It's sugar water at 4 a.m. It's the moment you choose to care without knowing how the story ends. If you've ever found yourself caring for something unexpected, tell us how it changed you. Your story may be the one someone needs to hear today. By the end of the week, Maple would stand on her own, a little unsteady, a little wild, but present, and so would Evelyn. The next chapter isn't about choosing to keep her. It's about what happens when something starts to feel like home, even when you promised it wouldn't. It wasn't a decision. It never is. One moment you're telling yourself it's temporary. Next, you're rearranging furniture for something that doesn't even speak your language. By the end of the first week, Maple had claimed a corner of Evelyn's life with quiet certainty. Not in a loud or demanding way, but the way sunlight claims a room. You don't always notice it at first, but once it's there, you can't remember how the space looked without it. She was still weak, barely walking, still wobbling, but the spark in her eyes had grown sharper. Curious, aware. Bobcats, even as babies, have a certain defiance, a kind of quiet sovereignty. Maple never begged, never whined, but she watched everything. Evelyn noticed the change in herself more than the kitten. She caught herself talking aloud again, commenting on the weather, her tea, the mail. She hadn't done that in months. And she began sitting in the living room more often instead of her usual perch in the kitchen by the window. There was no reason for the shift except that Maple's basket was there. And Evelyn had started choosing proximity over habit. One morning, Evelyn found herself Googling how to tell if a bobcat is imprinting. The answers weren't clear. Wild cats don't imprint the same way domestic animals do, but some bond. Some remember. That thought stayed with her. Later that day, she pulled an old cardboard box from the back of the hall closet. It was marked Percy. Inside were soft toys, a collar, a tiny brush, and a faded envelope. Daniel's handwriting, for when she's ready. She hadn't opened it before. Her hands trembled as she slid her finger under the flap. Inside, a letter. A short one. Love has a strange way of circling back. If you ever love again, animal or person, don't fight it. Just say yes. Evelyn folded the letter quietly and placed it next to Maple's basket. That evening, as the sky turned peach and gold, she whispered the name aloud again. Maple. The kitten stirred. Not in response exactly, but not in resistance either. Naming something is a kind of commitment. Evelyn knew that. Once something has a name, it exists differently. It asks for space, for care, for memory. She remembered a conversation years ago during a library reading hour for kids. A small boy had found a spider in the corner of the room and started to panic. His older sister crouched beside him and said, "Let's name her." He blinked, confused. She smiled and added, "It's harder to be afraid of something when it has a name." They named the spider Violet, and she lived in that corner for months. Evelyn thought of that boy, now wondered if he'd grown up with pets, wondered if he had learned what it meant to care for something small and wild and unpredictable. By the next morning, Maple had taken a few steps toward Evelyn's slipper, not close, just enough to mark territory. Evelyn didn't move, just watched. The line between wild and domestic is thinner than we think. Bobcats are not house pets. They don't fetch or cuddle or meow on cue, but they observe. They adapt, and when they feel safe, they soften. Evelyn still wasn't sure what she was doing. She had read enough wildlife guidelines to know this arrangement was unconventional at best. She hadn't registered Maple with any local rescue. She hadn't informed Fish and Wildlife, but she also hadn't planned on this. She told herself each day, just until she's stronger. But stronger meant something different now. Maple had begun sleeping under Evelyn's reading chair. She batted at strings with clumsy paws. She chirped a sound bobcats make when they're content or curious. She even licked Evelyn's wrist once, startling them both. That evening, Evelyn pulled out her phone and texted her son, "I have company. Small fierce. I'll call tomorrow." She didn't hit send. Instead, she opened the photo app and snapped a picture Maple curled in the basket, one paw over her nose. She stared at the image for a long time before saving it to an album titled New Chapter. Real stories don't always follow the rescue recovery release arc. Sometimes they double back. They pause. They ask hard questions. Evelyn had no idea what came next, but she was no longer afraid of the question. That weekend, Martha came by with leftover cornbread and a bag of knitting yarn. Evelyn didn't mention Maple at first. She wasn't sure what to say, but when Martha sat down and glanced at the basket, Maple lifted her head. "Oh," Martha whispered. "Well, that's not a cat." "No," Evelyn said softly. "She's not." They didn't say much more about it, but Martha reached over, gently scratched behind Maple's ear, and left a new toy mouse on the edge of the blanket before she left. The next day, Evelyn started writing in a journal again. Just a few lines. "She watches me like she's memorizing the rules, but I'm not sure I know them either. Maybe we're inventing them together." Real-life animal rescue stories often pivot at this moment, the point where the human must decide, keep trying to return the wild creature, or accept that the bond is real and unplanned. There's a woman in Maine who rescued a red fox pup and eventually worked with a sanctuary to keep him as an ambassador animal. There's a man in Utah who helped raise a lynx after a wildfire, documenting every step online. In both stories, what began as a one-time act of care became a lifetime of stewardship. Evelyn didn't know what Maple would become. A short story, a companion, a lesson, maybe all three. But she knew now that love doesn't ask if you're ready. It arrives and waits. That night, as she settled into bed with a book she barely read, Maple climbed up onto the blanket. Not close, just beside, facing the door. Guarding, maybe. Evelyn whispered Maple and the kitten blinked. Slowly. Once. A blink in wildcat language is a sign of trust. Not ownership. Not tameness. Trust. Evelyn closed the book and turned out the light. She no longer needed to keep 2 mugs on the counter, or leave Daniel's coat hanging by the door. But she did anyway. Honoring the past doesn't mean you can't welcome something new. Naming something doesn't make it yours, but it does make it matter. It signals care. It begins a relationship even with something you might someday have to release. Wildlife rehabilitators often caution against naming rescued animals too early, but those who do even temporarily report that the name helps them connect. And that connection, though risky, is what fuels recovery for the animal and the human. The line between human and wild animal isn't just drawn in behavior, it's drawn in belief. When you believe a creature deserves a second chance, you begin to soften not them, but yourself. Have you ever named something that wasn't meant to stay? Tell us how it changed you. Those quiet stories matter more than you think. Of course, nothing wild stays calm forever. The following week, Maple changed, grew faster, grew braver, grew wilder. And Evelyn would face a new kind of decision, one that didn't ask if she cared, but whether she could let go. It started with a scratch. Not deep, not deliberate, just a flash of claw across Evelyn's wrist one morning when she reached toward Maple's food dish too quickly. The kitten had flinched, then bristled, then backed away, not in fear, but instinct. A warning more than a wound. Evelyn didn't cry out. She didn't even pull her hand back at first. She just stared at the 3 fine red lines, blood welling slowly like truth rising to the surface. It was the first reminder that Maple was not and never would be a pet. She ran warm water over her wrist, dabbed on antiseptic, and wrapped the cut in gauze. Then she sat down on the floor beside Maple's basket, a foot away, not closer, and simply waited. Maple watched her with eyes more alert than ever, her tail flicking slowly and deliberately. The truth is, Evelyn had known. Even in the quietest moments, the blink, the purr-like chirps, the slow trust they'd always been, standing on a line drawn in instincts. And now, as Maple grew stronger, the line was beginning to shift. Later that afternoon, Evelyn found her on the windowsill, perched like a sentinel, ears twitching at the sound of birds. She was almost too big for the space now. Her body had lengthened. The soft, awkward movements of a rescued baby were replaced by something more graceful, more precise, and more unpredictable. There was a pull in Evelyn's chest. Not quite fear, more like the ache that comes from knowing something precious might not belong to you after all. That evening, she made a list. Not for groceries, not for errands, but for reality. Can't keep her long term. Need to contact a sanctuary. Research local wildlife specialists. Talk to Martha. Write the email. She paused after the last one. Just the thought of telling someone what she'd done, keeping a wild animal for weeks without a permit, without approval, made her hands cold. She tucked the list inside a book on her nightstand and went to bed without brushing her hair. The next morning, she opened her laptop and began to write the email. It took her an hour to craft 2 sentences. I found a young bobcat near death in early January. She is stable now, but I believe she needs to be assessed for long-term care or release. She read it 3 times. Her cursor hovered over the send button. Then she closed the screen. She made tea, washed the dishes, swept the kitchen, avoided the subject. Maple, meanwhile, began testing boundaries. She stalked insects with eerie stillness. She climbed onto shelves Evelyn thought were too high to reach. She growled softly when startled, and she avoided eye contact just slightly more than before. It was subtle, but Evelyn noticed. And it hurt in a quiet, sharp way. Wild animals, even the young ones, carry an internal compass. When they feel caged by walls, attention, or affection, they start looking for exits. Evelyn had built a sanctuary out of old towels and woven baskets, but she was no fool. She knew Maple wasn't meant to stay, but what she hadn't expected was the grief of preparing to let go while the heart still clung. That evening, Martha came over for tea. She noticed the scratch. Didn't ask at first, but after the second cup, she gently said, "It's time, isn't it?" Evelyn nodded. "I think so. I just don't know where she'd go." "You're not the first to find yourself here," Martha said, setting her mug down. "You love her. That's obvious. But loving something wild isn't about holding on. It's about knowing when not to." Evelyn didn't answer, but the words sat with her long after Martha left. The next day, she finally sent the email. 3 wildlife rehab centers replied within 24 hours. 2 were full. 1 offered to assess Maple provided Evelyn could transport her safely. She read the message twice, then replied, "Let me think. I'll follow up this week." That night, Maple refused her usual dinner and instead clawed at the kitchen rug for nearly an hour. She was growing restless, that much was clear. And Evelyn was running out of time. In many parts of the US, wild animal rescue is regulated by strict laws. Keeping a wild cat, even a baby bobcat, can result in legal consequences if not reported to authorities or transferred to licensed rehabilitators. Still, many individuals, especially in rural or small town areas, act on instinct and emotion, doing their best before seeking help. Wildlife rehabilitators often share stories of late-night drop-offs, handwritten notes, and emotional goodbyes from those who simply didn't know what else to do. On the third morning of that week, Evelyn awoke to the sound of something crashing. She rushed into the living room. One of the ceramic bowls from the windowsill lay shattered on the floor. Maple stood nearby, wide-eyed, tail lashing. Evelyn didn't speak. She just looked. It wasn't anger, not even frustration, just clarity. She spent the rest of the day building a makeshift transition space in the sunroom, somewhere between a playpen and an open door. Blankets, toys, food, less contact, more autonomy. Maple didn't object. She watched from the corner as Evelyn moved things around. Then, when it was finished, she curled up on the far end, half in shadow. That night, Evelyn didn't sleep. Instead, she wrote in her journal, "She's not mine, she never was, but part of me is hers now. And I don't know how to carry that forward. Letting go is rarely a single act. It's a series of small surrenders, a quieter voice, a shorter touch, a door left slightly open." Evelyn began preparing a box with Maple's things, her blanket, a worn toy, a photograph. She planned to send it with her if the sanctuary allowed. Not because Maple would remember, but because Evelyn needed to know she tried to make the transition gentle. The appointment was scheduled for Thursday. But on Wednesday, something unexpected happened. Maple didn't wake at sunrise like usual. She didn't chirp, didn't stir when Evelyn passed by with her mug of tea. Instead, she stayed curled, her breathing shallow, her body limp. Panic gripped Evelyn's chest. She dropped to her knees, checked her temperature, and whispered Maple's name over and over. The vet confirmed it later that afternoon, an infection. Nothing serious. A stress reaction, most likely. Dehydration, fatigue, and an immune response from rapid growth. She'd be fine, but she needed antibiotics, rest, fluids, and quiet. Evelyn brought her home, held her, slept beside her on the floor for 2 nights. And during that time, the question of release faded, because now the priority was not separation, but healing. Again, just when we think we've figured out the shape of a story, life folds it differently. Letting go isn't always linear. Sometimes the moment we step back, we're called forward again, not out of comfort, but care. Trust between humans and wild animals is not about taming. It's about rhythm, knowing when to step forward and when to give space. And often it's built not in grand gestures, but in how you respond when the bond is tested. Have you ever had to loosen your grip, not because you wanted to, but because you cared enough to try? Share your moment of letting go in the comments. Evelyn had prepared herself to say goodbye, but Maple wasn't ready to leave. And the next morning, Evelyn would wake up to silence. An empty basket, a screen door is slightly open. Maple was gone. And the real letting go had just begun. The house was quiet, too quiet. Evelyn noticed it before she even opened her eyes. There was no rustling from the sunroom, no faint padding of paws against the hardwood. Just stillness. She sat up slowly, her hand reaching instinctively toward the blanket at her feet, where Maple usually curled. Empty. She stood, her heartbeat already thudding louder than the morning breeze outside. Mug untouched, slippers half on, she stepped into the sunroom. The basket was there. The folded blanket. But no Maple. The screen door to the porch ajar. Her breath caught. Evelyn opened the door gently, almost as if afraid it would vanish at her touch. She stepped onto the porch, scanning the yard, then the tree line. The wind carried the faint scent of pine and frost. A crow called from somewhere high above, but nothing else moved. She whispered the name once, then again. Maple's silence. Losing something wild, feels different. It's not like losing your car keys or misplacing a photograph. It's not even like a lost pet. It's somewhere between absence and inevitability. Part grief, part knowing. Evelyn didn't run. She didn't panic. Instead, she walked the edge of her property in slow, steady circles, eyes scanning for tracks. The ground was damp from overnight drizzle, and sure enough, she found faint paw prints near the garden shed. 3 small prints, then nothing. She crouched, pressed her palm beside them. Still fresh. She followed the trail as far as it went, which wasn't far, just to the edge of the woods that bordered her backyard. Then it vanished into thick leaves and pine needles. She stood there for a long time, listening. The ache that rose in her chest wasn't loud. It was hollow. A kind of aching she'd once felt when Daniel didn't come home on time before the phone call. A low, humming grief that held its breath. Maple was gone. The rest of the day passed like fog. Evelyn left out food on the porch. She scattered pieces of Maple's favorite toy near the path. She whispered her name in the hallway just in case. And then she sat at the edge of the porch with a thermos of tea. She didn't drink, she waited. Evening fell. The food remained untouched. That night, Evelyn couldn't sleep. She moved from room to room, pausing in each one like it might give her a sign. Her body moved out of habit. Fill the kettle, fold the blanket, water the basil. But her mind stayed outside in the dark. She wrote in her journal. She didn't run. She returned to where she belonged. And I suppose part of me knew she would, but that doesn't make this any easier. The next morning, Evelyn woke just after dawn. Her back ached from sleeping on the couch. She reached for her phone, opened the Wildlife Center's email thread, and typed, "She's gone." Then she deleted it. She wasn't ready to tell anyone yet. Not even them. Many wildlife rescue stories include the moment of disappearance. Even in structured releases, bobcats often vanish without farewell. One sanctuary in Northern California once tracked a rehabilitated bobcat for only 2 days before the GPS collar stopped pinging. They never found her. But the caretaker said something surprising. She disappeared like a wild animal is supposed to. Evelyn remembered reading that article once. She hadn't understood it then. She did now. The days that followed passed in gentle rhythms. Each one is slightly quieter than the last. Evelyn didn't replace the basket. She didn't move the food dish. She didn't open the book where she'd saved Maple's first photo. But she did start walking again, out the back gate, into the woods. Not searching, just walking. Her boots pressed into soft soil, hands tucked into her coat eyes, flicking toward every rustle in the underbrush. Sometimes she thought she saw something just out of view. A flash of rust, a glint of gold. But when she turned, there was only air. On the 4th morning, she found herself standing near the same log she'd passed every day. This time on the bark, a single tuft of orange fur. Slightly coarse, familiar. She didn't touch it, she just sat nearby. Let the wind pass through her. Let the bird's song fill the space Maple used to take. It wasn't closure, it was continuity. That night, Evelyn lit a candle. Not for ceremony, just for company. She sat at the kitchen table and finally opened her email again. To the Wildlife Center, she wrote, "She left on her own. No signs of injury, no distress, just gone. I believe she was ready. I wasn't. But I will be." She clicked send. Letting go isn't always about releasing what you love. Sometimes it's about trusting that what you've loved knows how to return to itself. The next afternoon, Martha came by with a fresh loaf of sourdough and didn't ask questions. She just handed Evelyn the bread, squeezed her hand, and sat down on the porch beside her. They watched the woods in silence for almost half an hour. Then Martha said, "You know she might come back." Evelyn nodded. "Maybe." Martha paused. "Would you take her in again?" "I'm not sure," Evelyn said, "but I know I'd be glad to see her." That evening, she sat with a photo album she hadn't opened in years. Daniel is in a flannel coat, Her son as a boy was climbing a pine tree. Percy curled in a sunbeam. She flipped each page slowly, then tucked a new photo inside the back cover. Maple, just before she grew too big for the basket. Wild animal rescue isn't always about the animal. Sometimes it's about the human who learns to sit with uncertainty. The one who remembers how to wait, not for the return, but for peace. Evelyn started keeping a new kind of list. What I learned Maple knew more than I gave her credit for. Wild doesn't mean unloving. Softness doesn't mean weakness. Letting go hurts, but it doesn't have to break you. On Sunday, Evelyn walked through the woods again, this time without looking behind every tree. She paused by the creek, sat on the same bench where she used to read aloud to Maple back when she was still sleeping 12 hours a day. She didn't say anything, just listened, then she stood and walked home. Have you ever lost something and instead of closure found clarity? Share your story below. Someone else may need your voice today. The porch stayed quiet for a week, until one night Evelyn heard the faintest cry outside. Not Maple. Smaller, unsteady. Another stranger just like before. But this time Evelyn knew what to do, and she wasn't alone anymore. It happened on a Monday night. Evelyn had just finished tidying the kitchen, folding a dish towel over the sink and setting the kettle to boil. The porch light was still on, casting a soft glow over the frost-laced steps. She was halfway through jotting a grocery list, milk, honey, sunflower seeds, when she heard it. A sound, small, fragile, not quite a meow, not quite a cry. She froze. The last time she'd heard something like that, Maple was curled into a shape so still she thought it was part of the bench. That was months ago now, and Evelyn had promised herself not to chase shadows. But this sound wasn't a memory. It came again. She opened the front door slowly. A bundle of gray fur sat at the bottom step, trembling but upright. Large ears, narrow face, legs too long for its body, a limp in one paw, and eyes wide, unblinking, full of something between curiosity and surrender. This wasn't Maple, but it was something like her. Evelyn didn't speak. She crouched, held out one hand, and waited. The kitten didn't run. She fetched an old towel from the hall closet and wrapped the creature gently, keeping her movements slow. It didn't resist. Just let it be held. Inside, the warmth made the kitten blink once, then collapse into sleep on the towel-draped laundry basket. Evelyn placed it near the heater and sat on the floor beside it, her hands resting loosely in her lap. No reaching, no petting, just presence. She named him Scout before sunrise. Real-life rescue often repeats itself in unfamiliar ways. A friend once told Evelyn that compassion is rarely a one-time decision. It's a practice, like making tea every morning, like opening doors in winter. You do it even when you don't know what will come of it. Scout was different than Maple. He didn't chirp. He didn't challenge. He hid under chairs and behind bookshelves. He watched from corners and startled at every sound. He wouldn't eat unless the room was empty. Wouldn't sleep unless Evelyn left the light on. But he didn't try to leave. Evelyn took him to Dr. Harris, who confirmed what she suspected. Scout was malnourished, about 8 weeks old, with a minor paw injury. He'd likely been dumped or separated from a litter. Not wild, not feral, but not quite used to being touched. He'll come around, Dr. Harris said. Just give him time. Evelyn nodded. She already had. Over the following days, Scout began emerging more often. He explored. He knocked over a stack of mail and curled up in a basket of yarn. He batted at a shadow on the wall for a full 15 minutes. And when Evelyn walked past, he didn't hide. One night, she sat on the floor near his favorite hiding spot, reading aloud from a book about desert wildcats. Just her voice, low and calm, the way she used to read to children at the library. Halfway through the chapter, she felt a soft weight settle beside her hip. Scout. He didn't stay long, just enough to mark something new between them. The next morning, she found him asleep in Maple's old basket. She didn't move him. She just placed a blanket over his side and whispered, "You're safe here." The heart's capacity is a strange thing. Evelyn once believed it shrank over time, curling in on itself like paper left in rain. But now, she was learning something different. Maybe it expands quietly without your permission, making space even after it's been broken. Maple had taken a piece of her, but not the whole. Scout was proof of that. One afternoon, Evelyn found a letter in the mail from a woman named Teresa, a volunteer from the Wildlife Center. She had read Evelyn's blog post, The One Who Blinked First. The story of Maple had made its way through the local animal rescue network. Teresa wrote, "I've been doing this work for 11 years. I've seen people love and let go, and I've seen people try to hold on too long. What you did being there, then stepping back, that's the work. And now with Scout, that's the reward." Evelyn folded the letter and placed it in the journal next to Daniel's note. She wrote back a short reply. "He's not her, but I'm not who I was either." Scout grew fast. His limp faded. His fur thickened into a soft gray coat that shimmered in sunlight. He discovered the joy of empty paper bags and the chaos of laundry piles. He preferred to nap in high places, a bookshelf, a windowsill, once even the top of the fridge. He didn't mind Evelyn's voice. He seemed to seek it, especially in the evenings when the house quieted and the kettle whistled low. One night, Evelyn invited Martha over for tea and shortbread. They sat by the window watching Scout chase shadows across the rug. "He's no Bobcat," Martha said, smiling. "No," Evelyn replied. "But he's still teaching me things." Like what Evelyn thought for a moment. That the next good thing doesn't have to look like the last one. It's common for people involved in animal rescue to receive unexpected second arrivals. After a deep bond with one rescue animal, another shows up often when least expected. This is known among some rescuers as the open door effect. When one story ends, another appears not to replace it, but to continue the rhythm of care. One such case in Oregon involved a woman who rescued a wild fox cub, released it 6 months later, and then adopted an abandoned kitten 2 weeks after. "It wasn't planned," she said, "but I have space in my life now. I just didn't know it until she showed up." Evelyn didn't look for Maple anymore. But sometimes in the early mornings, she stepped onto the porch with her tea and let her eyes drift to the woods. She wasn't searching, just remembering. Once as Scout lay stretched along the windowsill, she whispered aloud, "She'd have liked you." Scout flicked his ear but didn't move. What we lose doesn't disappear. It creates space. And sometimes that space becomes the very place where something new takes root. Evelyn began writing more frequently, not just about Maple or Scout, but about what it meant to care for something with no guarantee. Her blog grew slowly, quietly filled with stories of bobcat rescues, wildlife rescue centers, cute animal videos shared by strangers, memories of soft paw prints on tile floors. She received emails from people who had also loved and lost, who had also opened the door again. One note read simply, "I adopted an old dog last week. Your post gave me the courage to try again." Evelyn printed that one and stuck it to the fridge. Rescue isn't always about the animal in front of you. Sometimes it's about the version of yourself you meet in the process, the one who thought she couldn't love again, and did. On the first day of spring, Evelyn sat on the porch with Scout curled in her lap. The trees swayed. A breeze carried the scent of blooming sage and lilac. Somewhere deep in the woods, a bird called out a sound that reminded her somehow of that first winter morning. She closed her eyes, not searching, not hoping, just listening. Has a second chance ever arrived when you least expected it? Tell us what or who reminded you that your heart could hold more than you thought. Scout was no longer a stranger. He was home. But Evelyn's story wasn't finished. Because one day, after posting another quiet photo of her morning tea and the cat asleep on her lap, someone left a comment that changed everything. "Would you ever write a book about this?" And Evelyn realized maybe she already had. She just hadn't shared the whole thing yet. The comment was simple. 8 words. Left beneath a photo Evelyn had posted on her blog, a snapshot of Scout curled in a patch of sun beside a chipped mug and a half-finished knitting project. "Would you ever write a book about this?" She read it twice, then a third time. It wasn't the first message she'd received from a stranger since beginning the blog, but it landed differently, as if someone had pointed out something she hadn't noticed was blooming right in front of her. That evening, she made herself a cup of chamomile tea, sat at the kitchen table, and opened the folder where she'd been saving posts, stories of Maple's first days, Scout's quiet arrival, reflections on grief, wildness, and the healing power of connection. There were dozens of entries, most just a few paragraphs. A handful were longer stream of consciousness pieces she hadn't intended to publish. But they were all there, memories she hadn't meant to keep, all held together by a soft thread of truth. This had changed her, deeply, quietly, permanently. She titled the folder, The Maple Project. Not a book, not yet, just the idea of one. A week later, Evelyn met Martha for lunch at a quiet cafe tucked between a used bookstore and a vet clinic. She hadn't told anyone about the comment or the folder, but over spinach quiche and Earl Grey, she asked, "Have you ever thought about doing something bigger with the small things you keep to yourself?" Martha sipped her tea. "Every time I water the plants." Evelyn smiled. "I think I might write a book about Maple and Scout. And me, I suppose." Martha nodded like she'd already known. "You should." She started small. One morning, she reorganized her blog, creating a new category, Wild Lessons, a place for the quiet truths that had emerged through each chapter of her life with these animals, starting with that frozen morning on the park bench. She wrote about the sound of breathing that almost wasn't there. She wrote about the first time she said Maple's name out loud. She wrote about Scout sleeping in her coat sleeve on the third night after she found him. And she wrote about Daniel, not directly, but through memory, through the cup of tea she still made in his mug, through the letter he'd left tucked in a box for when she was ready. The comments came slowly. One from a woman in Vermont who had once raised a baby raccoon and cried when it never returned. Another from a man in Colorado who'd built his backyard into a butterfly garden after losing his daughter. Evelyn read every word. She responded to each one, and then she wrote more. There's something powerful in ordinary people documenting extraordinary moments of animal connection. A retired postmaster in Minnesota once kept a blog about a fox that visited his garden every winter. Over time, the blog gained a quiet following. Other nature lovers, lonely hearts, even environmental educators. When he passed, his son printed the posts into a small book and donated copies to local schools. He never thought anyone would care, the son said, but they did. Evelyn thought of that man often, how writing was not just about sharing. It was about recording proof that something beautiful had happened, even if it ended. One night, Evelyn lit a candle and began arranging her stories into sections: arrival, trust, growth, release, return. She printed a few chapters, clipped them together with a clothespin, and set them on the windowsill beside Scout. He batted at the edge of the paper, then curled beside it as if guarding it from the wind. The process was slow. Some mornings, Evelyn sat at her desk to write and simply stared at the blinking cursor. Other days, the words poured out before she'd even made her tea. She began adding quiet moments from her daily life, the sound of Scout's paws on tile, the bird calls just before sunrise, the scent of maple leaves after a rain. It wasn't about the animals anymore, not fully. It was about everything that had happened around them, because that's how rescue works. It creates ripples you never expect. A few months in, she received another email. This one is from a small publishing collective based in Oregon. They had come across her blog through a reader recommendation. Would she be interested in turning the blog into a book? Nothing flashy, just a collection of essays, photos, and quiet wisdom. No rush, just a conversation. Evelyn stared at the screen for a long time. Her tea had gone cold. Scout had fallen asleep at her feet. She whispered, "Maple, what do you think?" The house didn't answer, but something inside her did. Small lesson. You never know who's listening. The things you whisper into the world, especially the soft ones, have a way of finding the ears that need them most. Evelyn said yes. And over the next few months, she worked with a small team to choose entries, format photos, and find the right tone. They kept the title simple: Found Light, Stories of Wildness, Stillness, and Home. The cover featured a bench beneath a maple tree, a silhouette of a small figure curled beside it. She cried when she saw it, not because of sadness, because of recognition. The day her author copies arrived, she stacked them gently on the kitchen table and ran her hand across the matte finish. She opened the first one, flipped to the dedication, "For the ones who find us when we least expect it." Scout jumped onto the table, sniffed the spine, then sat down like he'd been waiting all along. Evelyn laughed. "You're in it too, you know." She brought a copy to the local shelter with a note for the reading corner. "Thank you for what you do. Evelyn and Scout and Maple, wherever she is." The director emailed her later that week. "You've given our adopters a reason to believe in second chances again. Writing about rescue healing or wild animals isn't always about the animals. It's about the thread of humanity we rediscover in ourselves through them. In learning to care, we relearn how to live. Gently, purposefully, present." Evelyn kept writing, not for a book, not for readers, just because it felt right. Because her mornings were fuller now, Scout darting through the hallway, birdsong trickling in through the cracked window, and a deep, patient peace that hadn't been there before. She didn't need Maple to return to feel her presence. It lived in the way she noticed things now, in how she walked more slowly, listened more, chose softness over certainty. Have you ever told a story you didn't think anyone needed, only to discover someone did? Share a piece of it below. You never know who's listening. The book was never the end. Just a mirror, a pause, a thank you. Because one evening, while reading aloud to Scout beside the open window, Evelyn heard a soft rustle outside. She didn't rise. She didn't speak. She just listened. Some wild things don't return, but sometimes they do. It was just after dusk when it happened. The windows were open, letting in the cool hush of spring. Evelyn was reading aloud. Scout sprawled across the rug, one ear twitching at her voice. She wasn't reading anything special, just a letter from a reader who had sent a picture of their adopted kitten curled up beside a garden statue. But the words mattered. They always did. Then she heard it. Not loud, not urgent, just a shift, a single rustle outside the screen door. She paused. Scout's head lifted. Evelyn didn't move. She waited. A shape, small, quick, cautious, appeared at the edge of the porch light. The form stepped forward halfway into the glow, then stopped. Tufted ears, broad eyes, a soft orange hue along the shoulders. It was Maple. Older, bigger, beautiful, still unmistakably herself. She didn't approach. She didn't need to. Evelyn remained seated. She placed one hand lightly on the floor, palm up, not reaching, just offering. Maple looked, blinked. Once. Then she turned silent as breath and disappeared back into the trees. No fanfare. No goodbye. Just a quiet punctuation to something Evelyn hadn't realized was still open. She exhaled and Scout let out a soft mew before padding over to sit beside her. They didn't speak, but they understood. Some animals return, some don't. Some moments are meant to end where they started, but all of them leave something behind. For Evelyn, Maple's return wasn't about claiming her. It was about recognition that something once fragile had become whole and remembered where it began. And that was enough. In the days that followed, Evelyn noticed the sign's small paw prints near the fence line, tufts of fur caught on a branch, a faint trail through the undergrowth. Not every day, but often enough to feel like a note left at the door. Maple had returned to the wild, but she hadn't forgotten home. Wildlife rehabilitators often speak of the check-in behavior some rescued wild animals show after release. A fox returns to the edge of a property for a night or two. A hawk circles above a field where it once healed. Not because they miss us in the way we think, but because the memory of care leaves a mark even instinct respects. One Bobcat rescue center in New Mexico shared that a released Bobcat returned to the same rock outcropping every spring for 3 years. It was never for food, the caretaker said. She just stood there, looking, then left. Evelyn began her mornings differently now. She still made tea, still opened the windows, but now she paused at the porch step, not to call, just to look, to listen. Scout joined her, curious but calm. They had their rhythm, their own kind of domestic wildness. He'd taken to sleeping in the crook of Evelyn's arm, but only after 9 p.m. Before that, he roamed the house like a sentry. He had his own rules, and Evelyn honored them. Over time, the stories she told became less about Maple or Scout directly, and more about what they taught her. She wrote about how stillness can be an act of love, about how saving something doesn't always mean keeping it, about how wild doesn't mean unreachable, and how we are never too old or too broken to be transformed by something small, breathing, and unexpected. She began receiving letters from around the country. Retired teachers who took in feral kittens, grandmothers who planted butterfly gardens in memory of lost pets, single fathers who'd adopted senior dogs, strangers who simply wanted to say, "I get it." Her blog, Wild Lessons, became more than a journal. It became a kind of quiet refuge for others and for herself. One reader, a woman in her 70s from Montana, wrote, "I lost my husband 5 years ago. I thought I'd live the rest of my life in quiet. But your story reminded me that there's still movement, still purpose. I started volunteering at the local wildlife center last month. They assigned me to feed the baby raccoons. It's messy, loud, beautiful." Evelyn printed the letter and pinned it beside her desk. It reminded her that the life she rebuilt wasn't just hers anymore. It was part of something wider, something quietly echoing. Rescue is rarely a one-way exchange. We think we're saving them, but more often they're saving us from stillness, from isolation, from forgetting how deeply we're still capable of caring. Bobcats, though solitary by nature, imprint lightly when raised or rescued young. They don't become tame, but they may return to familiar spaces during times of seasonal change. Wildlife experts refer to this as territorial overlap, an echo of former safety. And while it's never guaranteed, it's not uncommon. In a recent study, trail cams in northern Arizona captured the same rehabilitated bobcat returning to the release site 2 years later, pausing for several minutes before walking on. Evelyn never installed a trail cam. She didn't need proof. Some things are felt, not recorded. Maple's return, however brief, had been real, and so was the change it left behind. In a world that moves fast and forgets even faster, there's quiet power in choosing to remember. To honor the small wild things that pass through our lives, whether they stay a moment or a lifetime. Not to possess them, but to be shaped by them. One morning, while brushing Scout's fur near the windowsill, Evelyn whispered, "I think we've built something, haven't we?" Scout purred, rolled onto his back, closed his eyes. She looked out toward the trees and smiled. We spend so much of life seeking meaning in the big events. Births, goodbyes, careers, milestones. But sometimes meaning curls up in a basket beside the fire. Sometimes it's a wild heartbeat under your hand on a freezing bench. Sometimes it's just the act of showing up again and again when there's no guarantee you'll be seen. And in that showing up, you rediscover something quiet but certain. You still belong. If this story reached something in you, pause. Before you click away, before the world returns to its usual pace, ask yourself, what wild thing have you loved? What moment, small and breathing, reminded you that you were still alive? And maybe most importantly, are you still open to the next arrival? Because one thing Evelyn learned is this: the story doesn't end when they leave. It continues in how we care for the space they opened, in the routines they changed, in the warmth they brought and left behind. If this story stirred something in you, leave a comment. Share a moment when an animal, wild or not, reminded you who you are, or simply write, I'm still open as your quiet promise to the world. And if you'd like more stories like this about rescue love and the wild lessons they bring, hit like, subscribe, and share this video with someone who needs to believe in second chances again. We'll be here, waiting, listening, and always choosing to notice.